Now, if you want to use one camera movement technique that costs you absolutely nothing, it's actually shooting in handheld. It's going to be able to get you a stable shot, but you also need the proper technique in order to do that. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to shoot better handheld footage for any camera. We'll get there. Now, first thing is going to actually be rigging your camera. And I know that actually it makes your camera look cool. It gives you these fancy videos you could put on YouTube, or at least it just gives me fancy videos I could put on YouTube. But there's actually a functional reason to rig your camera out. Now, the heavier the camera is going to be, the more stable handheld footage you're going to get. What ends up happening is that when you have a heavy camera like this guy over here, it's very hard for the micro jitters in my hand to actually affect the overall image on my camera because it's weighed down. Now, when you rig out a camera like the Sony FX6 or even the mirrorless camera that you're used to, you're gonna add more weight to it, which is gonna give you more stable footage. Now, some of the smaller mirrorless cameras, when they do have IBIS, takes a lot of those things away. However, because the camera's size, you are going to need IBIS in order to get rid of some of the micro jitters that you might have while shooting handheld footage. But you can mitigate that on cinema cameras that don't have IBIS by just rigging it out and adding more weight to it. Which means it's a perfect reason to like your camera's BBW and actually just add some accessories to it in order to weigh it down, but also make sure they're for functional reasons too. Now, once the camera's rigged out, I really hope you have these two accessories, a top handle and a side handle. And the reason why is because the hand placement of how you're going to treat your camera is going to be just as important as rigging the camera out itself. Now, I have my Sony FX6 here and it does have a side handle on it, and I can hold my camera similarly to how an NFL player holds a football. Now, right now I'm going to be using my forearm as one of the points of contact, and that means I'm going to be able to bring it closer to my body and I can hold it against my chest in order for me to shoot my handheld footage. Now, in a side handle configuration, this makes a lot of sense. Now, on the flip side, a lot of people like having a top handle as well, and I do recommend this as an essential to any camera rig that you're going to end up having. And the reason why you might want to do that is because a top handle usually splits the camera in half. So typically there's going to be a little bit more weight distribution on either side, a little bit more equally than using something like a side handle. Now, this is great if I'm going to shoot like this. I'm going to shoot close to my body. However, if I want to get different angled shots, using a top handle is going to be a little bit easier for balance. Now, you have your camera rigged out, you have all the accessories, and it probably is weighing you down a little bit, but you are getting stable footage. You might want to look at something called an easy rig. Now, an easy rig is going to be something that's going to be a vest with a little like fishing line thing kind of hanging off of it. And what it's meant to actually do is transfer a lot of the weight that's going to be on your camera from your arms and the rest of your middle back into your hips and some of the bigger muscle group that's going to be on your body. Now, I've been using an easy rig, especially when shooting with some of the bigger cameras for the last little bit. And one of the things you want to make sure that you're doing is you want to make sure that the easy rig's actually fastened on tight, because what's going to end up happening is because you have your camera on the front of it, if it's not fastened tight, it actually is going to shift forward and it's not going to solve anything for you. On top of that, you want to make sure that you're also getting the right easy rig for the weight of the camera package that you're going to be using. I got a couple of questions about using easy rig on Instagram, so I decided to address this. But if you have a camera that's too light for the easy rig that you're going to be using, what's going to end up happening is once you let go of that camera, it's going to shoot straight up and it doesn't necessarily feel the most effective because you're going to have to pull the camera down in order for you to get it in your hands and get more stable shots. It's actually not doing its job properly. Typically, when you put the easy rig on your camera, what's going to end up happening is that there's going to be a natural drop that's going to happen to your camera. And if you don't have that, then you might be using an easy rig that might be made for heavier cameras and your camera package is a little bit too light. Now, for me personally, because I've been using the Sony Venice for a little while and my FX6 is usually fully rigged out, I am using the Flycam 750N, which is generally made for heavier cameras and it's able to counterbalance a little bit better. However, for your camera package, you want to really make sure that you look up the payload to make sure that you get the right one. Now, the focal length you're going to use is also going to affect your handheld footage, and typically for me, I like to opt for wider focal lengths. Now, wider focal lengths do a lot better of a job in actually reducing the bumps and shakes that you're going to get in the corners of your image. And if you don't believe me, I'm actually going to try this out. When I'm getting handheld footage on something like a 7200, you're going to notice a little bit of a sway or a shake, and that's a camera lens with IBIS in it. Now, when I'm using my 20mm lens when I'm shooting in handheld, you don't see those shakes as much. And typically for me, my rule of thumb is I stick to under 50mm in order to get handheld footage. Generally speaking, unless I have an easy rig or a really stable way of getting the shot, I'm not shooting at 7200 while shooting in handheld. Now, when you take big steps when you're shooting in handheld footage, the absorption of shock for each of those steps is going to be a lot greater than when you take small steps in succession. Now I'm going to show you what that looks like wrong by taking really long steps and shooting in handheld, and it does look kind of weird. A lot of the footage is really shaky because it's not absorbing shock from my feet, and I'm a pretty big dude, so in terms of my big steps, the camera's going to shake a bit. Now when I'm using something like the ninja walk or the heel toe method, there's a lot less shock to be absorbed with the ground coming from your feet, which means that if you're using the camera in handheld, you're going to see a more smoother and stable shot when going from point A into point B. Now, this might be a little thing you have to get used to because no one actually walks this way. However, when you are handling the camera getting handheld footage, you want to make sure that the back of your heel and the front of your toe are really close together or even touching while you are doing your walk and getting that stable handheld footage. Now, another thing that you can do is just get stabilized lenses like the 7200 G Master version 2, which has something called OSS in it, or in-body stabilization in terms of the lens, and that'll get rid of some of the shakes and the jitters that you might get in handheld footage. Now, that is a little bit of a cop-out, and it's a little bit easy to do that because it obviously is going to have the stabilization built in, just like it would on your camera. However, what might end up happening is that these are a little bit hard to find, and if they're not hard to find, they're kind of expensive. So this isn't necessarily at the top of my list to get stable handheld footage, but if you are buying lenses, you might want to opt for something that has in-body stabilization or OSS, and depending on what camera brand it has, there's some sort of stabilization that's inside of the lens. However, some are a little bit more rare than others, and some are a little bit more expensive than others too. And lastly, and speaking of cop-outs, getting slow motion footage is also going to be a way to get stable handheld footage, but it is a double-edged sword a little bit. Now, when you are using slow motion or we are using higher frame rates, when you are recording the footage, it is going to emphasize all those smaller shakes and jitters. So if you have a high shutter speed, you're going to notice that things look a little bit too shaky. However, when you stretch out those frames on a 24 frame timeline, you are going to notice that your slow motion is going to be there. However, a lot of those bumps and shakes are going to be smoothed out because of the frame rate stretching. Now, this is also great, but it's also not my favorite as well because 60 frames a second in a lot of cases, you don't actually get audio when using something called S&Q mode. So if you do need audio, you might not get it there depending on what camera you're going to be using. On top of that, using slow motion footage in order for you to mask having bad handheld technique is not the greatest idea in the world. Because what ends up happening is that slow motion is actually meant to make things look more important or to emphasize a certain action. And if everything's important or everything's in slow motion, well then actually nothing feels important and you actually might get taken out of the story that you're actually trying to tell. That being said, those are some tips for you guys in terms of getting better handheld footage. A lot of people are transitioning up into cinema cameras nowadays, or even just different cameras in general, and shooting in handheld is a technique that comes with time, a little bit of practice, and a lot less frustration after watching this video. That being said, I hope you guys liked the video, or at the very least you learned something, and if you guys do want to see another video, there's probably one over here. That way you can learn about more cameras like the Sony FX30, the FX6, you could see some techniques, or you could start seeing some stuff about the Sony Venice that I'll probably leave somewhere on the screen as well. That being said, see you guys in the next one. Peace.